Admit It. The Strange Tale of Depsey the Rabbit. Chapter 15. Embarking. The prop room of Blaine. It on the Ink Playhouse felt like stepping into a theatrical fever dream. Costume racks stretched toward the rafters like colorful forests, their contents ranging from medieval doublets to space-age silver suits. Painted backdrops leaned against the walls. A cheerful village square here, a haunted castle there, all waiting for their moment under the stage lights. But in the harsh work lighting that Pearl had managed to switch on, everything looked slightly shabby, slightly false, as if the magic only worked when no one was looking too closely. Chuck slipped through the stage door first, his yellow box-shaped body practically vibrating with nervous energy. "This is perfect," he whispered to Lucy as she followed, her porcelain surface reflecting the overhead bulbs in patterns that made her look like she was flickering between solid and translucent. "No one will think to look for us here." Detective Bones arrived next, his skeletal frame moving with the quiet authority of someone who knew how to navigate restricted areas without drawing attention. Behind him came Pearl, clutching a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had seen 15 years of careful organization and growing frustration. "Finally," Pearl breathed, setting her briefcase down on a prop table wedged between a rack of ball gowns and a collection of rubber chickens. "Finally, someone who'll listen." The briefcase opened with a soft click, revealing the kind of meticulous documentation that only came from years of being systematically ignored. Manila folders arranged by date, each one thick with reports, photographs, and handwritten notes in Pearl's precise script. Chuck leaned forward, his scientific mind immediately drawn to the patterns Pearl had been tracking. 15 years, she said, spreading the files across the table's surface. A costume crown rolled out of the way, coming to rest against a stage dagger that caught the light with theatrical menace. 15 years of watching the same pattern repeat over and over, while everyone told me I was imagining things. Detective Bones picked up one of the files, his hollow eye socket scanning the contents with professional intensity. 300 missing person reports, he read aloud, all following the same sequence. Enhancement consultation, apparent success, growing concerns about side effects, then... He looked up at the others. Then nothing. Complete disappearance. Chuck felt his perpetual smile waver as the scope of the corruption became clear. "But now we can prove it," he said, his voice carrying more hope than certainty. "Your documentation, Detective Bones's authority, Professor Gosling's research about dimensional projection. We finally have enough evidence to make them listen." Lucy moved closer to the table, her crown glinting as she studied Pearl's careful chronology. "All these people," she murmured. "All these families who never knew what really happened." "That's what I've been trying to tell them," Pearl said, her telephone voice carrying a tremor that spoke of years of professional frustration. "I sit at that switchboard 8 hours a day. I know who calls whom when the consultations get scheduled, how the cover-ups get coordinated. I see the pattern in the phone logs that no one else bothers to track." Detective Bones was already thinking like a cop, his skeletal fingers drumming against the prop table as he processed the evidence. "This is enough for search warrants," he said with growing conviction. "Facility raids, proper investigations. My Uncle Mortimer is somewhere in Dr. Dinglegreen's operation, and we're going to find him." Chuck's scientific enthusiasm bubbled up, despite the grim subject matter. "And I can connect the enhancement technology to Professor Gosling's broadcasting theories," he added, pulling out his own notes, pages covered with diagrams and equations that looked like they belonged in a theoretical physics journal rather than a cartoon character's notebook. "The dimensional projection research explains how they're amplifying the corruption signal. It's not just individual procedures, it's systematic reality modification. Pearl nodded vigorously, vindication lighting up her features. "The timeline shows escalation," she said, tracing her finger across a chart that looked like a fever graph of institutional corruption. Individual disappearances in the early years, then organized operations, and now this broadcasting integration that's affecting entire audiences. The Lucy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the prop room's temperature. "You mean they're not just taking people one at a time anymore?" "They're modifying people's minds while they watch," Chuck explained, his voice dropping to a whisper despite their isolation. "The broadcasting technology creates a direct channel for corruption. Every performance becomes a delivery system." Detective Bones straightened, his professional pride asserting itself against the cosmic horror of what they were discovering. "Then we stop them," he said with the kind of determination that had carried him through 40 years of police work. "We present this evidence to Captain Drumstick, coordinate with other departments, shut down the facilities, and rescue everyone who's been taken." The prop room fell silent, except for the distant sound of rehearsal activity from the main stage. Somewhere beyond the costume racks and painted backdrops, the normal business of entertainment continued, blissfully unaware of the systematic corruption being documented just yards away. Chuck looked around at his companions. Pearl with her briefcase full of damning evidence, Detective Bones with his decades of law enforcement experience, Lucy with her protective instincts finally channeled toward active investigation. For the first time since discovering the ink visions, he felt genuinely hopeful. "We're really going to do this," he said, his yellow surface brightening with something approaching joy. "We're going to expose everything and save everyone." The sound of approaching footsteps made them all freeze. Chuck's perpetual smile flickered as he recognized the rhythm. One set light and bouncing, the other measured and precise. Before anyone could suggest hiding, Drake bounded into the prop room with his characteristic enthusiasm, his cartoon rabbit features radiating the kind of genuine happiness that seemed increasingly rare in their world. "Lucy," he called out, his voice carrying all the warmth that had first drawn her to him. "I thought I heard voices back here. Are you all having some kind of secret meeting?" Lucy felt her porcelain features warm as Drake approached, his sincere interest in their activities making her heart flutter in ways she hadn't expected cartoon characters could experience. "We're just working on some research," she said, trying to keep her voice casual while acutely aware of Chuck's reaction beside her. Chuck watched the exchange with a tightness in his chest that he didn't want to analyze. Drake's easy charm, the way Lucy's entire demeanor shifted when he appeared, the obvious affection growing between them. It all made Chuck feel smaller somehow, less significant in ways that had nothing to do with his actual physical dimensions. "Anything I can help with?" Drake asked, his offer completely genuine. "I've got some time before my next rehearsal, and I'd love to contribute to whatever you're working on." Before anyone could answer, Felicia Figtree swept into the prop room with the kind of entrance that seemed choreographed for maximum impact. Her elegant tree form moved with fluid grace, leaves rustling in ways that suggested a breeze that touched only her, fruit hanging from her branches with perfect symmetry. Chuck felt his analytical mind shut down as Felicia approached. There was something about her presence that bypassed rational thought and appealed directly to aesthetic appreciation. The way light played across her bark, the hypnotic sway of her branches, the musical quality of her voice, everything about her seemed designed to captivate. "How wonderful to find everyone gathered together," Felicia said, her attention sweeping across the group before settling on Drake with an intensity that made Lucy's protective instincts flare. "Such dedicated research. I do hope it's proving fruitful." Chuck found himself stepping closer to Felicia, despite every warning bell his scientific training should have been ringing. "We're investigating some irregularities in the entertainment industry," he heard himself saying, his usual caution evaporating under her influence. Lucy shot him a sharp look. "Chuck," she said carefully, "maybe we shouldn't discuss ongoing investigations with—" "Oh, but I'm so interested in irregularities," Felicia interrupted, her musical voice carrying undertones that seemed to resonate in frequencies cartoon characters weren't designed to hear, particularly when they involve such brilliant minds working together. Her gaze lingered on Chuck as she spoke, and he felt his yellow surface brighten with pleasure at the compliment. But when her attention shifted to Drake, something changed in her expression, a tightening around her eyes, a slight sharpening of her smile that spoke of emotions far more complex than professional interest. Drake, oblivious to the supernatural dynamics playing out around him, continued his offer of assistance. "Really, if there's anything I can do to help make our industry better, I'm all for it. The show business should be about bringing joy to people, not causing problems." Felicia's branches swayed in what might have been agreement, but Lucy caught a glimpse of something darker in the movement. Leaves withering slightly when Drake spoke, fruit trembling with what looked suspiciously like suppressed anger. "Such noble sentiments," Felicia said, her voice maintaining its musical quality despite the edge that was creeping in. "It's rare to find someone so idealistic about their craft." Chuck was too distracted by Felicia's proximity to notice the subtle menace in her tone, but Lucy felt every protective instinct she possessed activating at once. Something was wrong with this picture. Drake's innocent enthusiasm, Felicia's predatory interest, Chuck's uncharacteristic susceptibility to charm. Detective Bones cleared his throat, his professional instincts finally cutting through the romantic tension. "Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand," he suggested, gesturing toward Pearl's spread of documentation. "We have important work to finish." Pearl nodded gratefully, her telephone features reflecting years of experience managing conversations that threatened to spiral out of control. "The investigation requires our full attention," she said firmly. "Personal matters can wait until after we've saved some lives." But even as they tried to return to their evidence compilation, the dynamics in the room had shifted. Chuck kept glancing toward Felicia with obvious fascination. Lucy divided her attention between protecting Drake and worrying about Chuck's strange behavior. Felicia studied the group with calculating interest while maintaining her facade of helpful concern. And Drake, sweet Drake, remained completely unaware that his presence had just introduced complications that would echo through everything they were trying to accomplish. Pearl's organizational skills proved their worth as she guided everyone back to the evidence, despite the romantic undercurrents threatening to derail their focus. Her 15 years of switchboard discipline showed as she methodically walked through each piece of documentation, building their case with the precision of someone who had been waiting far too long for this moment. 300 missing person reports, she repeated, laying out photographs in chronological order. But look at the communication patterns behind each disappearance. Chuck forced himself to concentrate on Pearl's presentation, despite his continued awareness of Felicia's presence. His enhanced perception from ink exposure helped him see connections in the data that others might miss. "The timing isn't random," he observed, studying Pearl's charts. "There's a rhythm to the disappearances that corresponds with broadcasting technology development." Detective Bones leaned over the evidence with the intensity of someone whose personal stakes had just escalated dramatically. "My Uncle Mortimer fits the pattern exactly," he said, his voice carrying both determination and dread. "Enhancement consultation 3 weeks ago, glowing reports for 2 weeks, then growing concerns about personality changes, and now—" He gestured helplessly at the empty space where his uncle's life used to be. Lucy found herself genuinely moved by Detective Bones' obvious pain, her protective instincts extending beyond her immediate friends to encompass this grizzled investigator who had spent 40 years rubber-stamping tragedies without understanding their scope. "We're going to find him," she said with quiet conviction. "We're going to find all of them." The pattern shows they're not just eliminating people, Chuck continued, his scientific mind working through the implications. They're transforming them into something else entirely. Look at these reports from family members. He seemed different. She didn't act like herself. It was like talking to a stranger wearing my brother's face. Pearl nodded grimly. And the medical procedures are just the beginning. Dr. Dinglegreen's operation connects to Mr. Mystery's broadcasting development, which connects to systematic audience modification. It's not individual corruption anymore, it's infrastructure. Felicia had positioned herself where she could observe both the evidence and the investigators' reactions, her enhanced perception allowing her to catalogue their discoveries with predatory precision. But her attention kept drifting back to Drake, whose genuine concern for the victims was written clearly across his cartoon features. "This is horrible," Drake said, studying one of the victim photographs. "These are all people we know, performers, audience members, community leaders. How could this be happening without anyone noticing?" "Because the people who should have been noticing were part of the system," Detective Bones admitted with obvious shame. 40 years of covering up what I should have been investigating. 40 years of letting this grow into something unstoppable. Chuck felt a surge of sympathy for the skeletal detective, recognizing the burden of knowledge that came with understanding how long corruption had been operating under their noses. "But we're noticing now," he said with growing confidence. "We have the evidence, the patterns, the connections. Professor Gosling's research provides the theoretical framework that explains how the broadcasting technology works." Lucy looked up from a particularly disturbing report about personality modifications. "You think Professor Gosling will testify about his research?" "His academic reputation gives our case credibility," Chuck replied, his scientific enthusiasm building as he envisioned their official presentation. "When Captain Drumstick sees documented evidence supported by peer-reviewed research, he'll have to authorize full investigations." Pearl's expression brightened with 15 years' worth of suppressed hope. "Search warrants for Dr. Dinglegreen's facilities, broadcasting equipment seizures, coordinate rescue operations with multiple departments," she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose meticulous work was finally being recognized. Detective Bones was already thinking through tactical considerations. "We'll need to move quickly once we present the evidence," he said with professional focus. "The corruption infrastructure will try to protect itself once they realize we've connected all the pieces." Drake's natural optimism shone through, despite the grim subject matter. "But once people understand what's really been happening, they'll support shutting down the whole operation, right? I mean, no one wants their friends and family being systematically corrupted." Felicia's musical laugh carried just a note of something that made Lucy's porcelain surface prickle with unease. "Such faith in institutional responsiveness," she said, her tone managing to sound both admiring and condescending. "It's refreshing to meet someone who still believes the system can police itself." Chuck found himself defending Drake's optimism with more fervor than the comment warranted. "The evidence is comprehensive," he said, his voice directed toward Felicia, but his words supporting Drake's position. "Truth has to prevail when it's presented properly." Lucy watched this exchange with growing alarm. Chuck's obvious fascination with Felicia was making him protective of Drake, while Felicia's interest in Drake was becoming increasingly possessive despite her facade of casual conversation. The romantic dynamics were threatening to compromise the investigation at the worst possible moment. "We should focus on evidence compilation," Lucy said firmly, trying to redirect everyone's attention before the personal tensions exploded into something unmanageable. "The sooner we present our case to Captain Drumstick, the sooner we can start saving people." Pearl nodded gratefully, recognizing the wisdom of compartmentalizing personal feelings until after their professional obligations were fulfilled. "Time is a factor," she agreed. Every day we delay means more disappearances, more procedures, more systematic corruption spreading through our community. But even as they returned to organizing their evidence, the undercurrents remained. Chuck stealing glances at Felicia while pretending to analyze data. Felicia studying Drake with calculating intensity while maintaining helpful commentary. Lucy trying to protect both her friends while managing her own growing feelings for Drake. And Drake, wonderful Drake, remaining completely unaware that his presence had introduced complications that would follow them far beyond the prop room. The investigation continued, but the personal stakes had just become infinitely more complex. As the evidence compilation reached its final stages, the energy in the prop room shifted from desperate hope to genuine confidence. Pearl's 15 years of documentation had provided the foundation. Detective Bones's authority would provide the credibility, and Chuck's theoretical framework would provide the explanation that made everything comprehensible to officials who preferred their corruption systematic rather than supernatural. Look at this timeline, Chuck said, spreading his own research across Pearl's organized files. Professor Gosling's dimensional projection papers correspond exactly with the escalation in disappearances. They weren't just developing broadcasting technology. They were developing reality modification technology. Detective Bones studied the correlation with professional appreciation. And my Uncle Mortimer's case fits the current pattern perfectly. Dr. Dinglegreen is operating openly now because the system has evolved beyond needing to hide individual procedures. Lucy felt a mixture of horror and relief as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. Horror at the systematic nature of the corruption, but relief that they finally understood what they were fighting. So when we present this to Captain Drumstick, he'll have to authorize full investigations, Pearl finished, her voice carrying 15 years' worth of vindicated determination. Search warrants, facility raids, coordination with other departments. We'll have the authority to actually save people instead of just documenting their disappearances. Chuck's yellow surface practically glowed with scientific satisfaction. The evidence is comprehensive, the theory is sound, and the institutional backing is solid. Truth has to prevail when it's presented this systematically. Drake clapped his cartoon paws together with genuine enthusiasm. This is wonderful. Finally, someone's taking action to protect our community. I knew there were good people working to make things better. Felicia's musical voice carried approval that seemed just slightly too practiced. Such admirable dedication to justice. It's inspiring to see citizens taking responsibility for their community's welfare. But Lucy caught something in Felicia's tone that didn't match her supportive words, a quality that reminded her of actors delivering lines they'd rehearsed rather than expressing genuine sentiment. Her protective instincts sharpened as she watched Felicia's attention linger on their evidence with what looked suspiciously like professional assessment rather than casual interest. Detective Bones was already planning tactical details with the focused intensity of someone who had finally found a case worthy of his full professional commitment. We'll need to coordinate timing carefully, he said, organizing their evidence into presentation order. Hit all the facilities simultaneously before they can destroy evidence or relocate operations. Pearl nodded with switchboard operator precision. I can monitor communications to track their response patterns. 15 years of listening to their coordination calls means I know their protocols better than they do. Chuck felt genuine excitement building as their investigation reached critical mass. Professor Gosling's academic reputation will give our case the credibility that transforms conspiracy theory into official investigation. When respected institutions support our evidence, even Captain Drumstick will have to take action. Lucy looked around at their assembled team. Pearl with her meticulous documentation, Detective Bones with his professional authority, Chuck with his theoretical framework. even Drake's moral support adding weight to their cause. For the first time since discovering the ink visions, she felt genuinely hopeful that they might actually save people instead of just understanding how they were being lost. "We're really going to do this," she said, her porcelain features reflecting the prop room lighting in patterns that looked almost like stage spotlights. "We're going to expose everything and save everyone." The prop room fell silent for a moment as the weight of their mission settled over them. Somewhere beyond the costume racks and painted backdrops, the normal business of entertainment continued. But they all understood that they were about to transform the very nature of what entertainment meant in their world. Drake broke the silence with his characteristic optimism. "When this is over, maybe we can get back to what show business is supposed to be about, bringing joy to people instead of..." He gestured helplessly at Pearl's evidence of systematic corruption. The branches of Felicia swayed in what looked like agreement, but Lucy noticed that her fruit trembled slightly when Drake spoke about joy, as if the concept caused her some kind of internal conflict. Chuck was too absorbed in final evidence organization to notice the subtle wrongness in Felicia's reactions. "We have everything we need," he announced with scientific satisfaction. "Documented patterns, theoretical framework, institutional support, official authority. Captain Drumstick will have to authorize full investigations when he sees this presentation." Detective Bones picked up his hat with the decisive gesture of someone ready to transform evidence into action. "Then let's go save my uncle and everyone else who's been taken by this system." As they prepared to leave the prop room, Lucy felt a strange mixture of hope and foreboding. The evidence was comprehensive, their team was united, and their cause was just. But something about Felicia's presence nagged at her protective instincts, and Chuck's obvious fascination with the enhanced performer suggested complications that their investigation might not be equipped to handle. Still, they had come too far and learned too much to let personal concerns derail their mission. Uncle Mortimer was depending on them. 300 missing persons were depending on them. The entire integrity of their community was depending on them. They would present their evidence, authorize official action, and finally start saving people instead of just documenting their systematic destruction. What could possibly go wrong? Depsey's consciousness returned slowly, like surfacing from deep water that didn't want to let him go. The first thing he noticed wasn't the makeshift bedding Dr. Moose had provided, or the strange amalgamation of scientific equipment surrounding him. It was the gnawing emptiness in his cartoon stomach that reminded him how long it had been since he'd eaten anything resembling food. The meal waiting beside his improvised bed barely qualified as nourishment. Stale bread crusts that crumbled between his cartoon teeth, vegetables so wilted they seemed to have given up on the concept of freshness entirely. Everything tasted like cardboard seasoned with disappointment. But his rabbit physiology had been pushed past the point of culinary criticism, and even terrible food felt like blessing when your alternative was slowly starving in an interdimensional wasteland. As he chewed the flavorless vegetables, Depsey took his first real look at Dr. Moose's laboratory. The space defied any rational approach to scientific organization. Broadcasting equipment had been jury-rigged with chemistry sets in ways that suggested either brilliant innovation or complete madness. Maps of the rift hung over camera lenses, their surfaces covered with notations in Dr. Moose's erratic handwriting. Electrical cables snaked between beakers of bubbling solutions, creating a technological ecosystem that looked like it had evolved rather than been designed. Dr. Moose stood with his back turned, completely absorbed in adjusting what appeared to be a transmission array cobbled together from broadcasting technology and laboratory equipment. His antlers twitched rhythmically as he worked, suggesting either deep concentration or barely contained agitation. The combination was unsettling in ways that made Depsey's cartoon physics feel unstable. A soft tapping at the laboratory window made Depsey look up from his cardboard breakfast. Joko's raccoon face was pressed against the glass, his striped features distorted by urgency as he mouthed silent words. His paws gestured frantically, trying to communicate something that apparently couldn't wait for Dr. Moose to finish his work. The sight of Joko filled Depsey with contradictory emotions: relief at seeing a familiar face, gratitude for what seemed like genuine concern, but underneath it all, the persistent awareness that Joko had been pushed here by Mr. Muffins, the same Mr. Muffins that Depsey had later killed. Trust was a luxury Depsey could no longer afford, even when, especially when, it was being offered by someone who claimed to care about his welfare. Dr. Moose's antlers twitched more violently as Joko's tapping grew more insistent, but the Moose scientist remained focused on his equipment. Whether he was genuinely oblivious to the interruption or deliberately ignoring it was impossible to determine. In Tumbledown Town, Depsey was learning, motivations were always more complex than they appeared. The window finally proved too small a barrier for Joko's growing desperation. He abandoned his silent communication attempts and began speaking in whispered urgency, his voice barely audible through the glass, but carrying clear emotional weight. "You need to get out of there," Joko insisted, his cartoon features twisted with anxiety that seemed to go beyond simple concern for Depsey's immediate safety. "He's been in scientist mode all night, but it won't last. When he switches to mayor mode, he gets possessive." Depsey approached the window while keeping one eye on Dr. Moose's continuing work. "Possessive how?" "He sees you as property," Joko explained, his paws pressed against the glass in a gesture that looked almost like prayer. "The most important resident of Tumbledown Town, proof of his authority over all the other discarded cartoons. When the mayor personality takes control, he doesn't let important assets wander around unsupervised." The word assets made Depsey's stomach clench in ways that had nothing to do with the terrible breakfast. "And what do you see me as?" Joko's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt. "I see you as someone who needs protection, someone who trusted me once, and someone who deserves better than what I gave him." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Moose finally turning around, his scientific personality still apparently in control. "Ah, you're awake," he said with genuine academic enthusiasm. "Perfect timing. I've been monitoring the dimensional fluctuations all night, and the readings are absolutely fascinating." Joko's face disappeared from the window as he ducked out of sight, leaving Depsey alone with the unpredictable Moose scientist. Dr. Moose approached with the kind of excited energy that academic researchers displayed when they discovered something particularly intriguing. "The blue lights aren't just atmospheric phenomena," Dr. Moose explained, gesturing toward his cobbled-together equipment with obvious pride. "They're dimensional weak points, places where the barrier between our reality and your original reality matrix becomes permeable." Depsey felt something stir in his chest that he'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Hope. "You mean?" "I mean the largest blue light concentration shows clear portal characteristics," Dr. Moose continued, completely absorbed in sharing his research. "Theoretical dimensional gateway back to your original reality." "Of course," he added with academic honesty. "No one who's attempted transit has returned to report success or failure rates. Highly dangerous, completely theoretical, but theoretically possible." The hope that had been stirring in Depsey's chest exploded into desperate determination. Home. Actual escape from this interdimensional garbage dump where his victims worshipped him and his allies might be planning revenge. A way back to the cartoon world where he could... What? Resume his life as a serial killer. Continue taking blood money and elimination orders. But even a corrupted existence felt preferable to eternal imprisonment in a reality where guilt had been transformed into theology. How do I reach the blue lights? Depsey asked, his voice carrying more urgency than he'd intended. Dr. Moose's enthusiasm grew as he pulled out hand-drawn maps covered with notations and measurements. The portal concentration is approximately 12 kilometers northeast of Tumbledown Town, past the debris fields and through the reality distortion zones. The journey is treacherous, but the dimensional readings suggest optimal portal stability during specific temporal windows. Through the window, Depsey could see Joko's face reappearing, his expression shifting from anxiety to horror as he realized what Dr. Moose was revealing. Joko began shaking his head frantically, trying to communicate warnings that Depsey was too focused on escape possibilities to properly process. What kind of temporal windows? Depsey pressed, studying Dr. Moose's maps with growing excitement. The blue light intensity fluctuates on a roughly 6-hour cycle, Dr. Moose explained, pointing to charts that looked like they'd been compiled through months of obsessive observation. Peak portal probability occurs during maximum luminosity phases, though that's also when the dimensional instability creates the greatest danger for attempted transit. Depsey barely registered the warnings about danger. After everything he'd experienced since falling into the rift, the possibility of escape felt worth any risk. When's the next peak luminosity phase? Approximately 4 hours from now, Dr. Moose replied, consulting a complex calculation chart. Though I should emphasize that attempted portal transit without proper preparation and equipment is essentially suicide, the dimensional shear forces alone would... Dr. Moose stopped mid-sentence, his entire posture shifting as his antlers began twitching violently. Depsey watched in fascination and growing alarm as the Moose scientist's academic enthusiasm drained away, replaced by something altogether more authoritative and significantly less friendly. "What did you just tell him?" Dr. Moose demanded, but he seemed to be addressing himself rather than Depsey. His voice carried anger and authority that belonged to someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Depsey backed away as Mayor Moose emerged from the scientist's personality like a completely different person wearing the same body. "You told him about the blue lights," the mayor continued, his tone suggesting this was a serious breach of protocol. That information was classified for excellent reasons. "Aye, we were just discussing theoretical possibilities," Depsey said carefully, not understanding the personality dynamics, but recognizing the shift in danger level. "The blue lights are off limits," Mayor Moose declared with absolute authority. "As mayor of Tumbledown Town, I forbid any attempts to reach the portal concentration. You belong here now. You belong to our community." The possessive tone in Mayor Moose's voice made Depsey's cartoon physics feel unstable in ways that had nothing to do with dimensional distortion. This wasn't protective authority. This was ownership. Mayor Moose saw him not as a community member, but as a valuable asset that required careful management. Through the window, Joko was gesturing even more frantically, clearly recognizing the personality switch and its implications for Depsey's immediate safety. "I understand your position," Depsey said, moving slowly toward the laboratory door while trying not to trigger Mayor Moose's suspicions. "I was just curious about the scientific research. Theoretical interest only." Mayor Moose studied him with calculating intensity. Theoretical interest has a way of becoming practical action. You're the most significant resident our community has ever acquired. Your presence provides legitimacy and stability that can't be risked on dangerous expeditions to forbidden zones. Depsey reached the door and began opening it with careful nonchalance. "Of course, community stability is important. Remember what I've told you about the blue lights," Mayor Moose said, his voice carrying unmistakable warning. "They're forbidden for good reason. Accept your place in our community structure." Depsey nodded and escaped into the relative safety of Tumbledown Town's makeshift streets, where Joko immediately materialized beside him with obvious relief. Thank God you got out of there when you did, Joko said, his concern mixing with possessive satisfaction at having his warnings proven correct. When he switches like that, there's no predicting what he might do to keep you under his control. But Depsey's mind was racing with possibilities that had nothing to do with community safety or personality disorders. 4 hours until peak portal probability. 12 kilometers to potential escape. A theoretical chance of returning to his original reality. Joko, he said carefully, what do you know about reaching the blue lights? Joko's expression shifted from relief to alarm. You can't be serious. No one comes back from those expeditions. The dimensional distortions alone will tear you apart. But what if they don't? Depsey pressed. What if Dr. Moose is right about the portal possibilities? Joko stared at him with growing horror. You're really considering this, aren't you? After everything I just told you about the dangers? Depsey looked back at Dr. Moose's laboratory, where both personalities were probably arguing about whether to follow them or let them make their own catastrophic decisions. Then he looked at Joko, whose protective concern came packaged with possessive jealousy and the historical fact of betrayal. He couldn't trust Dr. Moose's shifting personalities. He couldn't trust Joko's complicated motivations. He couldn't trust any of the tumble-downtown residents who worshipped him for crimes he wanted to forget. But he could trust his own desperate need to escape this interdimensional prison, even if the escape attempt killed him. I have to try, he said finally. I can't stay here forever, being worshipped for things I wish I'd never done. Joko was quiet for a long moment, his raccoon features cycling through emotions too complex for easy interpretation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried reluctant resignation. Then I'm coming with you. If you're determined to get yourself killed chasing theoretical portals, at least I can try to keep you alive long enough to regret the decision. Behind them, Dr. Moose emerged from his laboratory, his internal conflict visible in the way he kept starting to walk in their direction, then stopping, then changing course. Both personalities wanted to follow Depsey to the blue lights, but for completely different reasons that would probably result in complications none of them were prepared to handle. As they began walking toward the edge of Tumbledown Town, Depsey realized that their expedition was going to include a possessive guide who'd betrayed him once before, an unstable scientist mayor whose motivations shifted without warning, and his own desperate hope that theoretical escape possibilities might prove stronger than dimensional physics. What could possibly go wrong? The journey toward the blue lights began with the kind of optimism that only came from having no better alternatives. Depsey walked with determined purpose, Joko followed with reluctant protection, and Dr. Moose trailed behind them, while conducting an increasingly audible argument with himself about the wisdom of their expedition. This is fascinating from a research perspective, Dr. Moose's scientist personality observed aloud. Live observation of portal transit attempts could provide unprecedented data about dimensional mechanics. This is dangerous from a community management perspective, Mayor Moose replied to himself with obvious irritation. Our most valuable resident is risking elimination on a theoretical possibility with no guaranteed outcomes. Joko glanced back at the arguing Moose with growing nervousness. He's getting worse, he whispered to Depsey. The personality switches are happening faster when he's under stress. Depsey kept walking, his yellow shoes leaving irregular prints in the rift's strange soil, while his mind focused on the possibility that 4 hours from now, he might be back in the cartoon world. The fact that no one had ever returned from blue light expeditions was a detail he chose to interpret optimistically. Maybe they'd all successfully escaped and simply had no way to report back. The dimensional readings suggest optimal portal probability during peak luminosity, Dr. Moose's scientist voice continued, apparently winning the internal argument for the moment. If transit is possible, this represents our best opportunity for gathering empirical evidence. If transit is possible, we lose our most important community asset, Mayor Moose replied with increasing agitation. The cost-benefit analysis doesn't support this expedition. Joko moved closer to Depsey as the arguing intensified. Are you sure about this? We could turn back, find some other solution, wait for better circumstances. But Depsey had spent too much time in Tumbledown Town, listening to worship that made him sick, and protection that felt like another form of imprisonment. The blue lights represented the first genuine hope he'd felt since falling into the rift, and no amount of personality disorders or protective jealousy was going to discourage him from pursuing that hope. I'm sure, he said, his cartoon rabbit ears catching the distant sound of something that might have been cosmic humming. Whatever's waiting at those blue lights has to be better than staying here forever. The landscape around them began shifting as they moved away from Tumbledown Town's familiar chaos. The debris fields that surrounded the settlement gave way to terrain that looked increasingly alien, soil that reflected light in ways that hurt to observe directly, vegetation that grew in geometric patterns too perfect for natural evolution, sky that shifted between colors that had no names in any language cartoon characters were designed to understand. The doctor's internal argument was becoming louder and more agitated with each step away from his laboratory. The portal mechanics require careful calibration, his scientist personality insisted. Attempted transit without proper preparation could result in dimensional displacement to unknown reality matrices. The community structure requires stable leadership, Mayor Moose replied with growing authority. Allowing our most significant resident to pursue dangerous theoretical possibilities undermines the social order we've worked decades to establish. Joko's protective instincts were clearly warring with his own fear of the blue lights. Maybe the mayor personality has a point, he suggested tentatively. Maybe community stability is more important than individual escape attempts. Depsey stopped walking and turned to face his reluctant companions. Dr. Moose fell silent mid-argument, both personalities apparently recognizing the significance of the moment. In the distance, the blue lights pulsed with increasing intensity, their glow creating aurora patterns in the rift's impossible sky. I appreciate that you both want to protect me, Depsey said, his voice carrying more conviction than he'd felt in years. But I need you to understand something. I can't be what you want me to be. I can't be the divine judge that Mr. Muffins worships. I can't be the valuable community asset that Mayor Moose wants to control. I can't even be the friend that Joko wants to protect. He gestured toward the growing blue luminosity on the horizon. Those lights might kill me. They might send me somewhere worse than here. They might be nothing more than dimensional radiation that will tear my cartoon physics apart, atom by atom. Dr. Moose's scientist personality leaned forward with obvious interest. Those are all distinct possibilities according to my theoretical calculations. But they also might be exactly what they appear to be, Depsey continued, ignoring the scientific commentary. A way home. A way back to a reality where I can choose who I want to become instead of being trapped by who I've been. Joko's raccoon features reflected the complex emotions that had defined their relationship since his arrival in the rift. And what if choosing who you want to become means choosing to leave us behind? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge that required more honesty than any of them were comfortable providing. Depsey looked at Joko, this most complicated protector. Then he looked at Dr. Moose, whose dual personalities represented the kind of fractured identity that 20 years of blood money had taught Depsey to recognize in himself. Then that's a choice I have to live with, he said finally. But staying here, being worshipped or controlled or protected from making my own decisions, that's not living. That's just existing in a pretty cage. The blue lights pulsed again, and this time their glow was bright enough to cast shadows that pointed away from Tumbledown Town, like arrows indicating the only escape route that mattered. Dr. Moose's internal conflict reached a crescendo, as both personalities apparently reached the same conclusion through different reasoning. "We're going with you," he announced, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested scientist and mayor were finally in agreement about something. "Research opportunities," the scientist personality added. "Community asset protection," the mayor personality concluded. Joko sighed with the resignation of someone who'd realized that love sometimes meant following people into danger rather than protecting them from it. "Fine, but when this kills us all, I want it noted that I tried to talk you out of it." They resumed walking toward the blue lights. Three broken cartoon characters carrying their complicated motivations toward what might be salvation or might be annihilation. Behind them, Tumbledown Town continued its existence of worship and survival, unaware that their most significant theological symbol was about to test whether escape was possible or whether some cages were designed to be permanent. The blue lights grew brighter with each step, their cosmic humming becoming audible as something that bypassed cartoon ears and resonated directly in whatever served as their souls. 4 hours until peak portal probability. 12 kilometers to potential freedom. One chance to discover whether hope was stronger than dimensional physics. What waited for them at the blue lights would determine not just Depsey's fate, but the future of everyone who believed that systematic corruption could be escaped through individual courage rather than collective action. The expedition continued, carrying them toward revelation or destruction with equal enthusiasm.